Whenever I meet a new group of people, I like to play this game called Bobby's World. It messes with their minds and it's fun, so stick with me. Bobby's World is an imaginary world where some things can exist and some things can't. I'm going to give you a few examples of things that can exist and things that can't, and you try to figure out why. For example, Bobby's World has trees but no leaves. There are schools with no students, and you can eat cookies but not cake. I'll give you a second. Some of you are looking at me extremely confused and trying to figure out some sort of pattern. Some of you have zoned out because you didn't come here to play any games. And some of you have probably figured out what the correct answer is. Let me explain. Anything that is spelled with double letters can exist, and anything that is spelled without them cannot. It's been in front of you the entire time. And some of you probably just experienced an aha moment. And that's what I thought my moment of Eureka always had to be. A clever answer, a sudden insight, except more dramatic, more impactful, and preferably life-changing. We hear these stories all the time. The Airbnb founders renting out an air mattress and suddenly inventing a global company. Netflix starting because somebody noticed a late fee on a DVD. The truth is, most of life doesn't always work this way. Your world is not like Bobby's. It's not going to give you a correct answer or some dramatic revelation every time. Instead, it's going to give you 1,000 smaller realizations in ordinary moments. I always thought that my Eureka moment had to be 3 things. Ideal, individual, and instant. However, I've come to realize that most moments of clarity are often none of these. Let me explain. Let's start off with the first one, which is ideal. I always thought that a Eureka moment had to show up in this ideal, perfect manner where everything suddenly makes sense. But one of my biggest moments of clarity was not like this. In fact, it felt uncomfortable. I studied at Claremont Mckenna College, which meant 2 things. It was on the outskirts of LA, and so I was surrounded by nature. Mountains, beaches, lakes, and lizards who loved to run into my apartment when I was trying to have a peaceful morning. And 2, I was surrounded by people who thrived in this environment. They would wake up in the morning spontaneously at 6 a.m., go for a hike, come back, go to the beach 4 hours later on the same day in scorching heat. And I was wired as the very typical South Bombay city girl. I just couldn't learn to love it. The heat, the bugs, the dirt, everything bothered me. One day my roommate walked up to me and she said, completely unprovoked, Tanisha, you think too hard and you complain too much. And I was offended. I was even defensive. I felt like it came out of nowhere. But when I stopped reacting and I actually thought about it, something clicked. Something shifted. I realized that I do complain a lot about everything and anything, and it wasn't helping me or the people around me. And so I tried conducting an experiment. Whenever a thought felt like a complaint, I didn't say it out loud, not to myself, not to anyone. I came back the next day wanting to complain about my annoying professor who assigned an annoying essay to finish in an annoyingly short amount of time, but I didn't. And something shifted again. The essay that I didn't want to write actually felt enjoyable. When I stopped complaining about having to decide what to cook for dinner, something that every college student has to do, I actually enjoyed finding new recipes. And when I stopped complaining about California's heat, I actually enjoyed waking up and going to the beach in the morning. And so I realized that sometimes a Eureka moment doesn't show up in that ideal, perfect moment we imagine. I realized that I could actually take what was new, shift my perspective, and learn to adapt instead of defaulting to what was wrong with it. That's what's really important, to actually take what's happening in your moment. It's not always going to be ideal, but it can teach you something new. Let's move on to the second Eureka moment. The assumption that a eureka moment always stems from just one individual in some perfect moment of solitude. So, the first few months of college are exhausting, full of small talk and where are you from, what's your major, what dorm do you live in, and after 4 weeks, it felt like the conversations were on autopilot. One Thursday, I went for lunch with a new friend that I had made, and we walked over to the best pizza place near campus, got ourselves a pizza each, and sat down. Ready, I thought, for yet another one of those predictable conversations. But as you could have guessed, this meal went differently. As we sat down, she asked me, "What's your major?" and then proceeded to ask me, "So what made you choose that?" Then she asked me, "Where are you from?" and then followed up with saying, "Isn't it different being in a small town instead of a city?" I left lunch 1 hour later, deep in thought. Every answer I gave, she followed up with a question. I felt closer to her in just 1 hour than I did to people I had been seeing every single day. And something clicked. I realized the importance of asking good questions. I told her she was an incredible conversationalist, and she said it's not about the conversation. It's about talking to someone to actually understand them instead of to respond to them. That lunch changed the way that I interact with people. Classmates then, colleagues now, and just about anyone old or new that I meet. But here's what I also realized. If I hadn't stopped to actually notice the way she carried that conversation, then I wouldn't have learned one of the simplest, most powerful tools of creating meaningful relationships. And I really want to stress upon the word notice here, especially when most of what we notice is on our phones. So sometimes a eureka moment doesn't stem from just you as an individual. It comes from looking up, stepping away from the short hits of dopamine on your phone, and paying attention to the people that surround us. Because sometimes real clarity can come from them and not just you. Moving on to the third I, the assumption that a eureka moment must always happen in an instant. That means it has to happen suddenly, and the dictionary says it as well. But in my experience, even the moments that look sudden rarely ever are. Last August, I founded a company called Blueprint Water, where we make custom branded paper packaged drinking water instead of plastic bottles. But the idea didn't strike overnight. Here's what actually happened. I was in Venice Beach with my family, and we were waiting in line to get coffee from my favorite coffee shop, Intelligentsia. As we stood in line, I noticed a carton on the display that said boxed water. I got curious and I bought one. A few minutes later, we started talking about how this would be perfect in India, a country where there's a lot of pollution. We ingest microplastics with almost every sip of water that we drink, and tap water just isn't the safest. Now, some of you will say that was your eureka moment. But the truth is that if I hadn't had a conversation 2 days earlier about doom scrolling on my phone, I would have probably been in line staring at Instagram reels, and I never would have noticed that carton in the first place. If I hadn't learned to love nature, the beaches that should stay clean, the landscapes I once complained about, then I never would have even cared about using paper over plastic. And if I hadn't researched on entrepreneurship in India for my senior thesis, I probably wouldn't have been as excited to come back home and build a real market for a product like this. So even though I did spot that carton in an instant, everything that made it matter, everything that turned it into a business venture had been adding up for months. And so a eureka moment isn't always ideal. It doesn't always happen to just one individual in some deep moment of solitude. And it doesn't always happen in an instant. It shows up in discomfort, in connection, and in accumulation. I've just graduated. I probably don't even have everything figured out. I might change careers. I might learn something new, unlearn something old. I might even have my big lightning bolt moment someday. But if we keep waiting for that lightning bolt moment, we'll miss what's right in front of us. So don't be like Bobby. Don't decide what should exist in your world and what shouldn't. Pay attention. Seek beauty in the things that may seem new, uncomfortable, irrelevant, scary. Because to me, that eureka feeling doesn't stem from just one strike of clarity. It comes from going through the world with your eyes open just a little bit wider than before. It comes from the accumulation of your aha moments. Thank you.